Welcome to the Hollywood Heretic, the entertainment industry podcast where we break down what's broken and how to fix it. I'm Wade Major, and today it is my privilege to welcome the founders of MoviePass, as well as the stars of the new documentary MoviePass Movie Crash, Stacy Spikes and Hamet Watt. And thank you both for being here.
Thanks, Wade.
MoviePass Movie Crash is directed by Muta Ali, and it's produced by Mark Wahlberg. It's an HBO original documentary. You can see it streaming right now on Max, and I have to say it is a fascinating, riveting documentary. As somebody who sees hundreds of movies a year, including dozens and dozens of documentaries, this film gripped me like a Hitchcockian thriller from beginning to end. Stacy Spikes is both an entrepreneur and an inventor. He's also the founder of the Urban World Film Festival, and he began his Hollywood career as vice president of marketing at Miramax Films and senior vice president of marketing at October Films. He also once dabbled as an actor, which we're going to get into in a little bit. And Hamet Watt is a venture capitalist and
some things aren't supposed to be said.
I know.
Oh, it's all good.
I did not know that my co-founder of 10 years was an actor.
I think it's a great story. And Hamet Watt is a venture capitalist and a founder of numerous ventures and enterprises, among them Share Ventures, Be Life, and of course, along with Stacy Spikes, MoviePass. So before I throw to the two of you, because I'm sure you're both really tired of telling the story yourselves, and I want to spare you as much PTSD as possible, to summarize for the audience, MoviePass was founded in 2011 on a pretty simple concept. First as a voucher service and later as a subscription service, which enabled subscribers to see theatrically released movies at discounted price. And the company later brought on former Netflix and Redbox executive Mitch Lowe as CEO, who then brought on an investor and executive by the name of Ted Farnsworth. And as those two became the face of the business, Hamet and Stacy were increasingly sidelined until they were actually fired from their own company. And within a year, the company was out of business. The good news is that as of 2 years ago, MoviePass is back in Stacy's hands and finally growing into the company it was always intended to be. So I'd like to focus this conversation as much as possible on getting your views on the future, because I think the movie itself speaks fairly conclusively to the past. But I want to kind of start off by asking both of you. It's pretty clear in the documentary that the experience left you both with some deep scars and lessons learned. But if you had to find a silver lining in the experience, what would that be? And Stacy, I'll start with you.
Yeah, in the documentary, there's a scene where Hamet talks about the increase in the lift. And we were always focused on trying to reduce the friction of going to the movies, the fatigue of what should I see, when should I go, and all the decisions that you have to make. And so the subscription service, we were hoping could lift 60%. And it ended up being like 111, 112%. And so we knew that there was something there that was helping to fill those empty seats, because we were just obsessed with only 30% of seats are sold. So there's so much headroom for growth. And, a movie is a perishable food. It is on the shelf only so long, and you got to get your money while you can. And so to not have flexible financial arrangements in order to not only elongate its life, but to give it more breadth and let more people see it by de-risking it. That's where Hamet and I were like minds about being able to do that and wanting to do that for the industry.
Yeah, it's a great point. I just remembering, our very first product was actually not the voucher program. We had a beautifully elegant, very technologically advanced system that involved QR codes and all this. That we were before our time in many ways. And I think the lesson learned was, we were big and bold going into it, saying, "Oh, this is an industry that is not adopting technology fast. This is a huge opportunity." Probably undercalculating the reason why it's slow to adopt that technology. These are typically folks that are older school in terms of the way they think about their businesses. And so we thought that we were going to be, I'd say more warmly welcomed as innovators coming into the industry, saying, "Hey, we can make more money for you. We can prove it. We can show you the data." But that wasn't the case. I think the lesson learned, I think for me, I think the silver lining, I'm sure for Stacy as well, is there's a point where we realized, okay, this is definitely going to happen across the industry. We catalyzed it. We were probably like not fully confident early on that we could actually do it, that the whole industry would transform, but it in fact has transformed out of necessity. And so I think for me, that's been a really exciting thing, just to think about other industries and having the confidence to know that if something doesn't make sense, it can be reimagined. It can be reimagined in a way that works for the whole ecosystem. Now, that's the idealist in me. But I think that really, particularly in the MoviePass case, really was the opportunity to make it work for studios, to make it work for exhibitors, to make it work for moviegoers. That was the challenge that the industry was facing. It wasn't working for all parties, and that's why you didn't see growth. Stacy and I thought that was the perfect opportunity to bring technology and design and all the things that we thought were important to the table.
And see, I love this because it's, I love outside the box thinking, and what you guys brought to this was really, really outside the box thinking. And as people often point out, Hollywood does not like thinking outside the box. We need sequels. We need remakes. It took this business forever to move to certain digital tools, on sets, to stop using pieces of paper for actors to sign in and out their timesheets, all to move to digital sign-ins and outs. All of that, the business caught up years after the fact. So, it sounds like part of the hurdle was, how do you get a business that is technology averse to adopt technology, even if it's to its own benefit? What were the hurdles there initially?
So many.
One of the things, there's so many, but one of the things that's a challenge is it's kind of like a chain of restaurants that are not a franchise, but they serve the same food, and yet they all are independently owned, separate, and they all operate completely separate. So you'll trying to herd all of those cats, and they tend to run in packs. And if you get this one over here, they'll say, well, we don't like them, and so we don't, if they did it, we don't want to do it. And then you'll get some who'll say, well, did the big three do it? Then we'll do it. So go get the big three first. But if you start with 4, 5, and 6, they don't like the fact that you're using people smaller than them. It's mind numbing. And when you're just like, we can make you more money. But the thing that I think is, I think where we were looking at it is, you've seen digital disruption in several categories where the legacy product had been 50 or 100 years old, whether it's taxi cabs or hotel industry or airline seats. And so we come in as a software solution. And so with Hamet and I not having the burden of being a theater or a movie studio, we could look at it from the consumer perspective. And it's just like, how do you just make it easier for them? And when we were first taking meetings, the iPhone and App Store were very new. And so when you walked in, and I won't say the particular theater chain's name, we asked them what their R&D budget was, and they were like, what's R&D? And we talked about how innovation would happen and experimenting, and would you like to run a trial or a test? The language of that was just so foreign to them, that it was frightening that these were the biggest players in the industry, and they didn't know R&D, they didn't know research and testing things, and let's run a few cycles. And thank God for Jerry Lopez, who was outside of the industry, who said, I'll give you a shot. Here's the metrics I need you to prove. Go prove it. And we were able to do that.
I want to cut right to what's kind of the elephant in the room, but I think in some respects it's become clouded as to what was really going on. And there's the moment in the film where you guys are clearly uncomfortable talking about, or not even talking about, but sort of uncomfortable with the fact that here's this thing that happened. A couple of black guys form a business, and a couple of white guys become the face of it and run it into the ground. And when I was looking at that, I remembered when I first saw an article about the two of you, and I think it might have been the LA Times, You're sitting in movie theater seats, and it was about the formation. And it was about a year, 2 years later, suddenly the other two guys are being talked about. And I remember a lot of us were saying, like, wait a minute, what happened to the other two guys? And it was, there was a really interesting question going on. And where I went with that was, even though obviously race is that 800-pound gorilla that's always part of the American conversation, in my mind, I thought, watching the documentary, I thought, here's an issue of culture, maybe more so than anything else. If we dig a little deeper, there's an issue of culture going on here. And one of my big beefs is that people too often, and especially in Hollywood, come in with an idea for business culture that is not in harmony with the audience. It's in harmony with Wall Street analysts and those expectations, and quarterly earnings, and what's going to get us a boost in 3 months. And it seemed to me that where you guys were focused on an audience experience, when the other two came in, they were focused on building a luxury brand. Is that a correct read? Because that seemed to me to be where there's a disconnect. And so maybe you can talk about, am I right in reading this as perhaps a cultural disconnect? But I want to just sort of help people watching this understand where the breach kind of took place in the visions for the company, and where what you originally saw was not what they saw, and perhaps try to get to the basis of why.
May, you want that one?
No, you give it a start.
Wait. I think when you mention build and brand in the sentence related to them, I don't think you could ever put those words in the sentence with them. They were trying to grow, and they had their eye on one KPI, which was sub growth, and get as big as you can, as fast as you can, and maybe scale will let you push down your cogs. If just being very transparent, I think that was the playbook that they were doing, and a lot of businesses historically have been able to do that. Raise as much cash as you can, get as big as you can, get up there, and you'll figure it out later. And they ran out of cash before they could. I think if they, Hamet and I were kind of sitting on the sidelines knowing every streaming company will launch. It'll probably launch at a cheaper price. When it gets to a certain level of scale, they look at their balance sheet and they'll say the price needs to be here or here or here, or we can stay where we are, and they adjust their prices. We kept thinking they're going to adjust the price because it was only meant as a promotional price for a first 100,000 people. And so think about how easy this would be, even if you had 20% churn out on you, but you set the price at the right price point, that we probably wouldn't be sitting here having this conversation. And so I think that's the part that didn't make sense. Like, take your foot off the gas. You're way out in front of everyone else. Slow down a little bit. Set the price where you need it to be healthy. When your customer base is saying to you, I'll pay you more to stay around, take their money. Like go ahead and adjust the price. And I think the whole industry would have been better off. And we're seeing later where the price settled when you see AMC and Rico are both sitting at around $25, $26. That if they were there, that you would have had a viable company, because when May and I were running it, we were at $30. And whether it's televisions or anything, you always start higher and work your way down. So we weren't that far apart from where the market ended up anyway.
Yeah.
And so that was the piece that just didn't make sense to us.
Yeah. I think philosophically there was just differences, I think, in terms of how long term they were thinking, because the company was public. A blip, a movement in growth moved the stock, and it felt like they instantly were enriched. And maybe in some ways they were in that short term enriched, which was not the way that Stacy and I were looking at growing the business. And I don't think they were thinking about it as a luxury brand. I mean, frankly, Stacy and I, when we first launched it, we were very focused on making it a premium experience. We had a beautiful leather box, but the card came in. We were very white gloved in the whole thing. And that was really part of our thinking, is to make sure it was a an aspirational experience. I remember one of the things that got me most excited about when Stacy and I first got started. I remember when I first moved to LA, and I got invited to this super cool kids dinner, and there was this guy, and he must have worked at CAA or something like that. And we were talking about movies, and he opened up his wallet. He's, "Oh yeah, I got a card. One of the theaters gave it. I can go anytime I want, unlimited." And I was just like, "Damn, that's cool. That seems like a really interesting way to experience it. That unlimited feel." So that was part of the feel that we were trying to create. I think the other point is, Stacy and I got to a place where we were like, we really hope you guys know something we don't know, because this is just not. We were kind of like, let's let go, because they're just starting to make decisions that just were not rational at all. And ironically, with Mitch, when Stacy and I first started working with Mitch, like before he became CEO, we were excited about some of that Netflix mojo, that data-driven Netflix mojo, because Stacy and I were building data systems, but we can learn from the guys at Netflix, because surely they're. And it turned out Mitch's was not from that school within Netflix, right? Not the data-driven school. I remember us talking about, hey, let's collect data so we can really understand how this is going to work long term, and let's figure out how long this promotional program should last. Blah blah blah. He was like, I think he told you that, Stacey. He was like,
Yeah.
it'll be fine. And I was like, fuck.
What it sounds like you're both describing is something that I bring up a lot, which is this clash between scalability and scarcity. And it's Netflix versus the studios, right? Because Netflix is all about scalability. Create as much product as you can, spend as much money as you can, create this giant ecosystem that has no ceiling. Whereas the movie business is a scarcity business. It's like sports at the same time. You can't have 50 different NBAs and 10,000 teams. It's only valuable if there's one NBA and a limited number of teams, and there are a limited number of studios, and there are 52 weekends in a year, and there are only, I think, like 15,000 screens in North America, and only so many seats in those screens, and only so many movies are going to be able to get that premium position on a weekend, much less a holiday weekend. Those are all kind of very scarcity-based business metrics, and it seems to me that even Hollywood generally right now, is the reason they've lost so much money on streaming is because they lost sight of the fact that the movies are valued in the scarcity environment. When movies go into theaters, that's the premium experience. That's what people say, there's a movie over there that's valuable, and then it makes money in theaters. Now we know how much that movie is worth, as opposed to a movie on Netflix on streaming. They tell us, well, 10,000 minutes watched. We don't know what that means. So is this, am I reading this correctly? Is this collision between scarcity and scalability a problem? And if so, how do we get the business to move back to that scarcity model, to appreciate that that's where its bread is buttered and stop bleeding?
I'll let Hamet give his point of view. I think we make a mistake in comparing streaming and movie going. I think the analogy is a little like comparing live music concerts and listening to music and streaming. They don't have anything to do with one another. I think you have to compare live events to live events. So what's beautiful about the movie industry, it is the number one, no matter which country you're in, it is the number one out of home entertainment activity in the world, and by frequency. And so on a single movie in a 4-day period on a holiday weekend, more people will go and see a movie than a single film than all of the people who will go to all the NFL games in 1 year. And so
Wow.
the fact it has such a huge power base that what Hamet and I believed is it just needed a technology upgrade. It's like what Uber did for taxi and limousines didn't change you get in a car and go from one point to the next, but they added you could see the car that was coming to you. The car knew who you were, and it was going to pick you up, and you both knew where you were going to go and how long it was going to take to get there. it added all of these things. And so when we were coming at subscription, we were looking at this as the live event part of the arena. So I think sometimes crossing those two, that's how people used to compare. No one ever during COVID ever said they're going to close sporting arenas and they're not coming back, right? And no one ever said that no one's going to have concerts ever again. But I think we conflate streaming when it is the live event of the movie industry. And so you're right in scarcity that the circus is coming to town, it's going to move through, it's here for a limited time, and it's gone. That I agree with you as far as scarcity, but we've had windows always. Netflix was just cable with cutting the cord, but playing something in the theatrical window and then putting it on a home video window, it still exists today, and that didn't change. That's my.
You know what's been? I think it's a great point. You know what has been really amazing to watch for me is this response to being in COVID and how many people are going to malls. How, like, even just take another industry, the gym going. Everyone thought that gyms were dead, and everyone thought that people were just going to do Peloton at home. But now everyone is in the gym spot. And I think that same thing, it goes to the underlying problem that needs to get solved, which new MoviePass can absolutely do. And I think this was always part of Stacy and I's hypothesis, which is people want to be together. They don't want to always be by themselves. It's a fundamental human need. The Surgeon General says loneliness is the #1 health epidemic. So these are things that are real problems, and getting together, whether you're watching a movie or whether you're going on what, but the movie going experience is that catalyst to getting together with people. And so I think there's a really amazing opportunity. The biggest challenge we had in raising capital was people were saying, oh, it's like, you're raising money for horses and buggy whips, right? Now the movies are going to be dumb. And we were like, people still want to get together. They want to get together. They want to experience it. It's not only about the big screen, but it's about having people next to you here and talking about it in the lobby. I think there's an expansion of that. There's an expansion of that togetherness in the movie-going experience that Stacy and I even experimented when we were before. We had a partnership at one point with, who was it, Uber, and we had care.com. We had this one button date night. You push a button, someone from care.com shows up to watch the kids, you get picked up, and your MoviePass takes you to movies. Done.
See, I
right?
love that.
and that's the kind of thing I think that is necessary. I just want to make another point, though, Wade, because you mentioned this in the first question. I think it's such an important point related to technology and innovation in the entertainment industry and how it impacts the business model. There's a tsunami coming in this space and in the entire entertainment industry, and it's powered by AI. And it's a tsunami that will either wipe folks out or will be the best ride, the best surf experience you could imagine in history. And I think it depends on the mentality, the mindset, and the culture as to where you're going to be on that, where the companies are going to be on that, which side of that they're going to be on. Are they going to be riding that wave in the most incredible, epic way, or are they going to get crushed? Some of the folks, Google's talking about some of the estimates around how generative AI is going to impact the filmed entertainment business. And they're saying upwards of 90% of that industry will change and will move to some sort of generative approach. So I think what Stacy and I started in terms of investigating how the industry reacts to innovation, that was like just the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more coming innovation-wise. And it can be an incredible value to the industry. And the artisan part of it is now they're just new tools. So it will be artists and creatives that learn how to use these new tools to tell better stories and engage audiences and create better experiences. But I think if they are head in the sand, frankly, the way they were when we were trying to introduce subscription, if they're head in the sand that way, they're going to get crushed by this tsunami.
It's a great point. And we see that the even right now, as we're recording this, the negotiations with the Teamsters and the trades are still dragging on, presumably over AI, the same thing that plagued the actors and the writers last year.
Yeah.
There's a meme floating around. I'm sure you've seen it, which says, I want AI. I don't want AI to do my poetry and my writing so that I can do dishes and laundry. I want AI to do my dishes and laundry so that I can do the poetry and the writing.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Right. And it's a tool, and it's going to have a lot of different applications. And I think it's not about either or. It's about where do you implement it in your workflow. So I think
I think it's like
that's a
talking
great
to an
point.
accountant. There was a time when you talked to accountants about computers, and they would turn their nose up and they say, "You don't need computers to do accounting." Yeah, it's
Yeah.
just like any other tool. And so I think you're right. It's about the best people in the business figuring out how to use these tools in a way that helps everything work better.
I want to talk about the box office right now. You talked about coming out of COVID, and it was an amazing thing to see Top Gun Maverick just come out of the gate with a head of steam and make over $1 billion globally when everybody said, oh, movie
Yeah.
theaters are done and no one's going to go back. And that really, Hamed, that went to your point. People want to be together. And, anybody who's ever been in seen the ruins of ancient Rome and ancient Greece, we got amphitheaters thousands of years old. People have always wanted to be together. That desire does not go away in our day and age. So let's talk about this weird box office that we've been having. It started off with The Fall Guy and Furiosa underperforming. Everyone said, there it is. It's proof that everything is over. Bad Boys 4 came out, blew the doors off. Nobody saw that coming except my other podcast co-host, Tim Cogshell, who kept saying to us and everybody else, he says, you aren't looking at Black Twitter. If you look at Black Twitter, Bad Boys 4 is going to be huge. And it is. And it was. And it came out, and we forget that it was Bad Boys Forever that was the one hit of the pandemic year 2020. So that proved that people were going to come out again and again. And then Inside Out 2 and Despicable Me 4. Now it's going to be a record summer in many respects. So what you guys know this area, what brings people out, what doesn't bring them out. How do you read what we have seen so far this year with this very weird box office?
Stacy?
Yeah, I'll jump into this one. I'm going to say something that's a little different than your question. So I'm old enough to remember before IMDb and some other
I am
things.
too.
And if you remember when movies came out, the news Saturday night, Sunday, and maybe Monday was someone stood outside a microphone, and when they walked out of the theater, they asked people, what did you think of the movie? And they judged their excitement, whether it was little kids just saw Star Wars or whatever. And we didn't get into grosses. When you watch on Sunday or Monday morning quarterback, all of the sports shows that are covering football, they talk about the game. How was the game? How were the plays? That's what we used to do at the movie industry. Do you know what we talk about on Monday morning? The grosses. And we know historically, Blade Runner was not a big box office film when it opened up. Most of the great films, Furiosa was magnificent. It was unbelievable film. It was the best film in the franchise from a director who's in his 70s and innovating in ways that nothing in the franchise had done before. Okay. So the danger, I personally think we need to stop reporting grosses because, and you'll notice Netflix is moving to stopping reporting certain things because they want to draw people's attention back to what is important, which is this is an art form and this is art. And we do not say, wow, that football game was great, but they only sold 90% of the seats. So it's a dud, right? We don't do that in any industry, but we do it in Hollywood. And so I really do think that we need a shift that if a studio wants to tout its grosses because it did well, go ahead. But I do not think we should report box office, because I think that it's misleading, because the fans who sit in an auditorium and see a movie leave with a sensation and a feeling. They weren't in there with everybody and going, oh, well, you know what? It only did this much in gross, right? They get that experience. And when I saw Furiosa on IMAX opening weekend, I saw it Saturday, people walked out of there and were mesmerized by what they saw. And so I think there's a danger in us continuing to be in the post IMDb world where that's what we focus on. I'd like to see us get back to when we talked about the movie.
Great point. I
May.
don't have anything to add to that. I think it's very
Okay.
well said. The only small point I would make is just going back to the idea that, experiencing things together and having that Furioso moment, probably with, I don't know if you brought your wife or your baby, your 18-year-old baby, but being able to share that moment, and it just like any other shared experience, My wife doesn't really give me credit for a date night unless we're getting if we watch a movie at home, that's nice. Maybe you get maybe 50% credit for it. But if we want to say we went on a proper date, we've got to be out. And so I think it's just an important part. I never thought of that. You're right. No one ever talks about how many tickets got sold to the football game, or how many viewers tuned in. It's not a proxy for whether the game was good.
That's right.
And see what
Wait,
what you're talking about. Yeah.
Sorry, there's one other thing that I think is so miraculous when you talked about post-COVID. So here's something very interesting. So remember when a concert film came out, I'm going to talk about the concert films for a minute and how formatting is all of a sudden changed. When a concert film came out, it was something that a band did in between tours. To see Taylor Swift and Beyonce easily could have gotten $100 million from a streamer, right? But to see that artists are now doing it as extension or part of the tour itself, right? They're getting the higher ticket where they're getting $200 to $1,000 on a per ticket. But then I went to see both of those concert films. Taylor Swift, they stood up and didn't sit down the whole time. It was crazy.
Yeah.
And when you see like Blackpink and the K-pop, like they're all using the auditorium, like Hamet said, they're using it as an extension of the concert now. And they're gathering that money as well. When we used to see that horror used to just sit in October, horror is now year round. And so there's these things that have happened. Bollywood is pressing in more. There's so much happening underneath though. What did the number one grossing film do that reporters don't get the true story about what is happening beneath the surface? There is new life forms and new patterns developing in ways that I've never seen. I've been in the industry for 30 years and I'm seeing patterns. You can break faith-based. How you talked about Mission Impossible, about Top Gun, but think about the fact that Sound of Freedom outgrossed Mission Impossible, a faith-based film that was crowdfunded outgrosses Mission Impossible at the same time in the release pattern.
It outgrossed Mission Impossible. It outgrossed The Flash. It outgrossed Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. It outgrossed all of those. Mm-hmm. I mean, you're leapfrogging everywhere that I want to go. You're getting me ahead of the game. So, but I love that you're bringing it all up. So, what you're talking about first, it made me think of Kevin Costner's Horizon, because Costner goes out there with a paradigm-shattering thing, and everyone is saying, "Oh, 11 million opening weekend, $100 million movie. It's done. It's toast. It's a bomb." And Costner says, no, I come from the era where movies are allowed to breathe a little and live in theaters a little longer. And, just because you have something else lined up 2 months from now, you have to get all your grosses in the first 3 weeks. So now they're letting it breathe a little. They've pushed the sequel on to the end of the year to let people discover the film a little longer. And that is part of shattering this paradigm. I mean, if you look on the numbers.com, they have a graph that is really fascinating because it shows how many wide release studio films versus how many wide release non-studio films get released each year. And the studio films dropped below the number of non-studio films for the first time these
Wow.
past 2 years. It's fascinating. And that's because of Sound of Freedom. That's because of Taylor Swift. That's because of Beyonce. That's because of Godzilla -1
Right.
coming
Right.
in, right? That's because
Incredible movie.
Toho doesn't even have an office in the United
Yeah.
States, and they wide released that movie. So it feels like there's a change. I mean, you're speaking to it. So do you see that change from where you guys sit right now?
Yeah, absolutely. And I dare to say you've got 60% of theaters that have some form of subscription. And what May and I realized was we weren't going to change the destiny of Spider-Man, right? But if you were an art house film and somebody was on the fence, they used the subscription service as a insurance policy for wasting my time, right? So it's like, let me go check it out. And we also know that we increased movie going 50% midweek. So we were filling those empty seats and we were getting them to take risks on film, where back in the day, if it wasn't the big tent pole, if you're not Jaws, you're not Star Wars, it was, I'll wait till it comes out on cable. When you introduce subscription, it was, it's date night, I have the time, let's go. What's the worst? We already paid for it, try it. And so you took away a huge thing that we were 20% of Lady Bird sales. We were the number one seller of tickets for Mr. Rogers, Won't You Be My Neighbor? So the art house and independents, we disproportionately drive traffic to those titles because that's the experimentation. Like Kamei said, with that person with the card, with MoviePass, it was always a discovery tool, right? It was always something that would expand your horizons.
Interesting.
Because now you were in a world where, like with Netflix, let me go check that out because I'm not on a cable window that I have to pay for, like the old days of HBO. You had to pay for the new releases, or you had to pay for the fight, or you had to pay for certain games. It's a discovery tool, and that's the thing that makes such a big difference. And so I think you're seeing shifts in programming, shifts in playability, all due to the nature of subscription opening up people's behavior patterns.
So let me ask you both this question, because you did what no one else did. You thought outside the box. You brought this idea in. People pushed back on it, and it worked. And now everybody's kind of riding your tail on that. You've got AMC Stubs, and there are other subscription plans out there, which I think has to feel kind of gratifying on one level, but painful on another. Am I right?
May, you can take
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. I mean, we felt like there was going to be other players that would embrace the model. And I would say that we thought that there was a better opportunity for those studios and even the exhibitors to collaborate with us in a consortium and have a Switzerland, so to speak, for the benefit of the broader industry rather than all of them just duking it out one by one. But I think it was just kind of inevitable. I think ultimately when we were doing our deal, we talked about the movie, we were doing our deal with AMC, with Jerry. We had done the test, which we funded to prove that we could increase the incremental movie going. That the addition of MoviePass and subscription would drive more revenue attributable only to MoviePass. That was a test that we did, and when we got the results, we were like, "Yes, this is it. This is what we needed. We're going to get AMC. The other ones are going to drop. They're going to see that they can make more money. They're going to see that they're going to be able to move their stocks. All the things that matter." And then when Jerry left, we had a guy who took over for him, and he was very closed to working with us and wanted to do things entirely different.
Right.
And that was really a tricky thing. But so we knew at that point, okay, well, clearly they're just going to take the data and take the approach and do it themselves, even if that meant that might be not as positive for their business in the long run. but it is gratifying in some ways. And I think as I look at new businesses to start and fund, and I think as I support Stacy and what he's doing in MoviePass 2.0, it's just you get confidence around saying, okay, well, some of the work that we're doing to understand the way the trends are working, and be a little courageous, even though it's hard, and a lot of people will hate on new technologies and put roadblocks around innovators coming into the industry. That's just part of the game. And so, like, we're used to it. I mean, the amount of times that Stacy and I had, sleepless nights calling each other, wives, being probably a little frustrated or worried. I mean, I remember, Stacy, you and I were counting the number. I think we had, it was over 9, like, holy shit, oh, we're totally screwed. Oh my God, what's going to happen type moments. I'm not talking about stress. I'm talking about super stress. There was not like existential, like, holy shit moments. And so now I think you build resilience when you have enough of those. You've taken enough of those shots. You've had enough of those scary moments and still survived. It's given us, I'd say, some superpowers in terms of what we're doing next.
Well, bravo. I mean, to my mind, the great gift that MoviePass gave and continues to give the business is that at a moment as we had seen, ticket prices going up and attendance going down, and I think it's fascinating, Stacy, when you said that 30% of tickets, 30% of seats never get sold. Like that's a metric that I didn't know.
70%.
70.
Oh, 70, only 30% get sold.
30%
Even worse.
of seats are sold. 70% are unsold.
So, I mean, that's a devastating metric. That is a problem. That's a problem to figure out. And I think what you guys showed the world was people want to go to see movies. The obstacle is not that people are giving up on the experience. There was a recent LA Times article right before the box office blew up again that said the audience has moved on. And then Inside Out 2 came out. Clearly they haven't. So, it's still showing up as a sponsored article in my Facebook feed, and it's just an embarrassment that they're still pushing it. But, you showed that people want to go to the movies. You just need to find that price point, find the incentives. You just need to rebalance all of these forces so that you're getting people to a place where they can do what they want to do.
Yeah, it's when Hamet and I were, so we got in, we knew each other, but we hadn't worked together, and I didn't know he had the passion around the space. And so the very first time we were in a room with the whiteboard, if you remember Leonardo in The Aviator, there's a scene where he's rubbing his hand across the wing, and the guy's like, "What are you doing?" He's like, "Well, if I can shave these rivets down," and he's talking about friction. And Hamet and I, because again, we weren't thinking how much popcorn and soda we have to sell, or how what's the budget of this movie, and how many days are going to be shot. We were purely focused from the consumer experience and saying, what would get us to go easier? Well, give me an all-you-can-eat model, and let me go wherever I want. And now you've taken away so much friction that, so here's another one of the metrics, how Hamet and I were looking at it. We took the total production and marketing spend per year, and then the gross of the box office. And then if you're a studio, because you're spending all of that money, the theater's not spending the money to get them to your location. We took that amount and noticed, even if they were doing well, they were losing $5. It was costing them $7 to $10 to acquire a person in the best of times, right? On a hit. Mm-hmm. So if you got a third of people to become subscribers, they've paid you the money. You don't have to spend those ad dollars to get them to come. Just make them aware of what's playing and when it's playing, and they'll do the rest. And that was how we were coming at it, reducing the friction. And when we went to the studios, they were like, yeah, we're spending a lot of money, and it's very, very expensive. And there's a nuclear arms race of cost. And it wasn't creating better efficiency. And so we saw with the AMC and Jerry Lopez test, for having the consumer pay you first and then eat their way into what they wanted to see, put the onus on them. No one blames the gym because they didn't go to the gym, right? And when they get their membership. Right. And so they all put the onus on them. Oh, I got to go. Oh, I got to get fit. Oh, I got to eat less. So put that dynamic in the relationship of movie going, and you completely change the paradigm. And so we were looking at it from that perspective, and people just don't look at it because one is in the IP business and the other one is in the restaurant business. They're not in the movie going business. So
it's so smart. I mean, that's just so smart. And on a certain level, I mean, it's almost too obvious, which gets me back to that point about how the business is just fiercely resistant to technology and to improving efficiencies. And I'm not sure how you get past that. But let me pivot for a second to something else that's interesting, which is the data shows that movie going overseas is back. If it's not fully back here, it's back overseas. Is there something that first of all, is there something that we're not doing quite right, that we're not back where they are in Europe and in Asia, in the Middle East and South America? And does MoviePass have any interest in expanding internationally?
So I'll answer the second part first, which is yes, we have always from day one had a vision that was international in scope. We always wanted to be, this, as Hamet said, Switzerland, we wanted to be this umbrella that you can go anywhere and do anything. And we've still to this day never excluded theaters. We've never excluded titles. It was always go where you want. We came from a user perspective. Well, so we're already looking at being able to have a MoviePass here and go. So I know in just this year alone, I tested it in Dubai. I tested it in New Zealand. I tested it in France, London. So we've already got the rails laid. We signed a 5-year deal with MasterCard. So the goal is to first light up someone who has it in the US. So if you travel, you can use it. And then secondly, start to issue, you're really issuing a MasterCard, even though it's digital, you're issuing a MasterCard in that territory. And you have to abide by those rules, and you need local issuers. So the job is to get those issuers up in those territories. But today we can turn it on that you'll be able to use your MoviePass in foreign. And that's the first thing that will probably happen.
Wow. Well, good
luck. The only I could add really is on the, I think that, again, I'm a supporter in MoviePass 2.0 with Stacy, but I'm not sitting in the co-pilot seat with him anymore, but I'm cheering for sure. I'd say, and
yes, he
Stacy
is.
and I,
called from me yesterday. I'm always calling him. Like he's still sitting there. He just doesn't realize it.
Spiritually, for sure. The thing that we have, Stacy and I, Stacy as someone from the industry. I was not in the movie business before. I was just, I'm coming more from the technology and the consumer standpoint. Stacy had both, right? Coming from the industry and knowing how antiquated some of those worlds may be, but then being a technologist and curious and, thinking about the consumer and the brand experience. And I'd say one of the things that we always talk about, and I hope in 2.0 will be central, is just understanding the broad movie experience, right? The whole experience, right? It's about reducing friction, but it's about what happens when you're there, and what happens when you're in the lobby, and what happens after, and how does that become the thing that gets us together, that really, really does get us together, because that's something, to your point, Wade, that will never go away. Humans wanting to have contact with other humans will never go away. And it just so happens that movie going is the number one catalyst of that. And so how do we play into that and remember that and make sure that we just innovate on the experience continually? And it's not about seats that necessarily shake, although that could be cool, and all the other things that are happening in the hardware, but it's about just the whole experience. And I think in Europe, at least, that some of the theaters that I've seen pay a lot of attention to that. And I
Okay.
don't know that it's to the extent that I think Americans require even more, and so I think that's why there's an opportunity for MoviePass 2.0 to really do that and host that change.
Wade,
And
I
to
have a
yeah,
traveling in a lot of those markets. I have a little bit of a theory, especially in Europe and in certain places. There's still a pedestrianness about the
outstanding point.
cities. The cities
Yeah,
are, and so the movie theater, you walk by it more, and you'll see a line, or you'll see when you're in LA, you get in your car and you go from one point to the next. And
Yeah.
in most of our major cities, we have a lot more space and we're spread out with cars. Um, when I was in Paris or London, you'll walk past several theaters on the way. So from my hotel to when I was at WeWork, I walked past 3 or 4 theaters, and you know what happened? I took a picture of the show times and said, oh, maybe I might go on the way home. And so, one of the things I think that helped with the rebound outside of the US markets is the cities are much more designed as pedestrian cities. And you walk past and you'll think, hey, honey, or a person or whatever, a friend, meet me. I just walked past and I forgot Godzilla opens today, right? It's a physical reminder in your day rather than say some billboard that's away from you. And I think that's a really big difference as to why some of those markets bounce back faster.
That is an outstanding point. So to the U.S. point, we're suddenly seeing a lot of really interesting things. Sony just bought Alamo Drafthouse. Crazy. We're Paramount's changing ownership now, going to David Ellison, and he's inheriting a theater chain. And Regal just announced $250 million that they're going to put into upgrading their theaters. This does not sound like people are abandoning the theatrical experience. This sounds like people see, like everyone else sees, what you guys saw in the first place. So they're catching up with you. They see, yes, holy cow, maybe it's not all on the other side. Maybe people really do want to stay. So, the future looks bright with all of that. I mean, those are good trends, good signs.
Yeah, I mean the other one that that made Sony buying Alamo Drafthouse possible is the sunsetting of the Paramount decree.
Correct. Yeah.
And so that's huge. And we saw for a moment there was some flirting with AMC possibly being bought by Amazon. I still don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that you see an Apple or an Amazon or even a Netflix go and start to gobble up the big three. Amazon's probably the one who will do it first, given they understand the advantages of brick and mortar on the ground when it comes to distribution and extending certain things around. um, what they did with Whole Foods and food, I think you can possibly do with certain forms of entertainment and engagement. um, there's a lot of merchandise opportunity, there's a lot of food opportunities at those places. um, you can do a lot of things with them if you start thinking in very tall verticals that are not being utilized today. We also think that there will become bundling where you will see the AMs the something like MoviePass and your Disney Plus being bundled together, because what we found, everyone likes to say or, it's
Yeah.
streamer or, and it's not, it's and. If you are a consumer of visual content, you consume it outside the home and you consume it at home. If you are a big music person or you're a big reader, there's sometimes you go over to people who, when Amazon really rode the wave of audiobooks, and remember when people said kids, our generation were playing so many video games, they said kids were never going to read books. And then J.K. Rowling comes along, and it's
Right.
like, what do you mean kids are standing in line for a 500-page book and they're reading it in a night? And that's again those trend lines where everyone said no one's going to read books anymore because we were the MTV generation and we played video games. And so I think you're seeing the pendulum swing on the whole space. And like Hamet said, COVID drove that recognition that we want to be with each other. We don't want to just Netflix and chill and be in our house by ourselves. It's lonely, and loneliness is a killer. They said that after, because we saw different people on the spectrums from, you know, teenagers to seniors, and they say that when your mate dies or you retire, your life expectancy goes down very fast. But we did Valentine's Day promotions where we had couples saying we no longer dated. And like Hamet talked about with his wife getting out, they said, your MoviePass got us out of the house. It helped us to date again.
Love it. Love it. So Stacy, I am glad that your acting career didn't take off because what you have done is amazing. No, truly. But I do want to go to, and I'm not going to spoil it for anyone who hasn't seen the film, but that story, and I think it's hilarious that Hamet didn't even know about that. You kept that secret. But the story as you related it in the film, it immediately made me think back to American Fiction, which I think is one of the great films of last year, and thank goodness it won an Oscar. Because for my again, to Tim Cogshell, my other podcast co-host, I remember calling him up right afterwards and go, Tim, I just saw American Fiction. It's your story. It's about you, man. It's everything that you've complained about for the last 30 years. Did that occur to you when you saw American Fiction? Like, I've lived that a little bit.
Oh, I think there's a lot of us that we've lived that. You gotta live these kind of dualities. And Hamet says in the documentary, you don't know sometimes whether it was two guys coming in and challenging the status quo and introducing new technology, and how much of it was two black guys coming in the room, changing the status quo and introducing new technologies. And no one's going to tell you, right? And you don't know.
Yeah.
But I think the way I choose to, as a technologist, is I don't see it as racism as much as I see it as pattern recognition. When basketball first started, there were no black players in baseball, football, or basketball. Now, today, if you want to start a basketball team, you're not going to select your team the way you did in the 50s. And that's a pattern recognition difference. And I think the more faces like Hamet and I are seen, knocking on the boardroom door and, getting into Jerry Lopez's office and seeing Amy Miles when she was running Regal, it's the more it happens, the more everyone's going to get comfortable in technology. And when I first started, and I know when Hamet first started, venture capital wasn't even a thing. There was no list. You didn't even know where to go, who to talk to. You had to know the secret password and be at this party at Bessemer or this one up. And they were these extensions of relationships. And you had to go to Yale, Princeton, Harvard, Stanford to know some of the passwords to get in those rooms. And so it's new. And I think the more they all get used to seeing us show up, the more the money is going to flow better. But it's the early days of sports. They're seeing us on the field for the first time. And, we're really grateful that HBO spent a few $1 million to tell our story so that people can know, and Muta Ali did an incredible job balancing.
Amazing. Amazing.
We were worried about what is it going to be too much on the race card? And I think he did a very good job of balancing it.
It is an amazing documentary, and you both are really, really exceptional voices in it because it tells a fair story. It tells an honest story. It goes into every single capillary of that story. and you walk out not just sort of informed, because I didn't know the whole story. Like I told you, I saw an article with the two of you and then an article with the two of them, and I thought, well, what the hell happened here? Something went down, and it fills in all those blanks. But you come out optimistic, right? I come out, despite everything that you guys went through, I feel like you guys went and fought a fight for all the rest of us, and you took your lumps, and now we're all going to be better off for it. So I want to pivot just to kind of start to wrap this up. I've never seen anybody ask you guys this. Tell me some of your favorite movies. What movies make you go to the theater? What makes you get out of the house and go on that date night, Hamet?
And I rewatched it again recently. I don't know if you're familiar with Revenant with Lou.
Yeah, sure.
Just, just a, I like posters in movies. Do you know what I mean? I think that from a storytelling standpoint and a visual cinematography standpoint, that was just unbelievable. And in the theater, I saw it in the theater originally, and I, of course, rewatched it. I actually rewatched it on my Vision Pro in a movie theater on the plane.
Yeah.
Which, if you haven't played with that, it's kind of fun. But just the way that director used cinematography and nature, and then the number of challenges that his character went through was just extraordinary to me. It kind of my wife says, "Why do you like watching that stuff? It's so stressful." And it's like, you've been through enough stress. Like, why do you do that? But I like that story of like overcoming it, and when everyone thinks you're going to be dead, you thrive. Even when it's like, oh my God, if he takes another hit, he's not going to survive. And he takes another hit and he gets past it. It's super inspiring and motivating to me. So that I think that is one of my favorite movies, maybe my favorite. And then The City of God, which is a Brazilian movie, just beautiful, beautiful movie. And even the colors stick in my brain. It's like a brain massage almost. I just love the experience of all the different camera angles and colors and textures. That I think that had been my favorite movie for a long time. I think now Revenant is giving it a run for its money after I rewatched it.
Stacy.
I love this quote that I steal all the time. And this actress once said, she was asked this question and she said, people who like movies have favorites. People who love movies can't possibly. And I think every movie should be seen, and there's beautiful things about them. And sometimes the thing about the movie is the things that aren't even on the screen. So when we know Christopher Nolan chose not to use special effects, chose to shoot in IMAX, chose to build a town, chose to not tell his actors certain things, there's stuff that doesn't even happen on the screen that goes into it that becomes part of the folklore about it. And when we go see it, that's part of it. And I think the same thing that May mentioned, I love that no matter whether it's a comedy or horror or sci-fi, it is constantly a story about the will of the human spirit to overcome impossible odds. And every movie is about that. And I just recently got to go see the 4K restoration of Seven Samurai at the Film Forum around the corner. And oh my God, it holds up. It's like this is a 1950 something film, and it just holds up. And you see how all the westerns, and you see how all of the Clint Eastwood, and you see this template of that idea of the samurai who struggles with honor and decency and morals and rights, but he is a warrior and he has to fight and he has to kill someone even though he doesn't want to. And there's this whole moment where this young samurai, he's the youngest one and he's wanting to become a samurai, and he falls in love with one of the young ladies in town, and they all think they're going to die tomorrow, and so they have an intimate evening, and the other samurais are so dishonored, right? A samurai is not supposed to sleep with the vulnerable, right? and he's standing in the rain realizing he broke a samurai code that he didn't realize was there.
Yeah.
And to not take advantage of the weak, even if they love you and they're turning to you for hope. And that's the kind of stuff that, I love Lawrence of Arabia. I love watching Blade Runner. I too, like Hamet, I have my Vision Pro, and whenever I'm flying, I'm on the plane with my Vision Pro, and it's amazing experience. So
In a
anyway,
movie theater, right? In a
yeah,
virtual.
yeah. While doing Mach 8 at our point 8, at 40,000 feet in your own movie theater. It's an insane time we live in.
Two last questions. If they make, and I should probably say when they make an eventual dramatization of this story, who should play each of you?
There was an article that came out that talked about
we
that.
we actually did this. So, and the I think it's Will Smith is playing Hamet and Sterling K. Brown's playing me. So that's what
fantastic.
that's what the casting was when we were doing our own unofficial version of it. Yeah.
That's great. Last question. And Hamet, I'd love to hear you weigh in on this from the venture capital side first. If there is one business practice in America, not just in the entertainment business, but if there is one aspect to business culture in America that you have learned is an obstacle to furthering all of this kind of progress, technological progress, movie business progress, just getting us going forward, if there's one just nagging roadblock, speed bump, what is that you could change tonight, what would that be?
That is a fantastic question. One thing that is sort of the major obstacle towards innovation and
Yeah, that just to get us to where we need to be, what is preventing us from getting past that point in your experience?
I
Or
would
is there
say
one thing, or is it many things?
it's definitely many things, but I'll just go with what came to me immediately, and that is the word fear and the relationship that we all have with fear. Whether it's the entrepreneur, whether it's the customer, whether it's the industry, we all have fears, and we all have different relationships with it. And I think most of us have fairly unhealthy relationships with our own fear. And it's something that I work on myself all the time. And as I see industries, and Stacy and I experienced this head on, really fear was the thing that was the biggest problem for us in talking to the ecosystem, because we could put all the math down and say this is going to create more value for your business, Mr. Studio or Mr. Exhibitor. But if they were afraid of the way that technology might impact them, then they're just going to be frozen. And that didn't help them. It didn't help us. It didn't help anybody. It didn't help the consumer. And so I'd say from an industry standpoint, that's a clear one. And then as it relates to being an entrepreneur, I think this is one of the best experiences that Stacy and I came out of this. We had to face fear in so many different ways at so many different times. The muscle around that relationship with fear is health. I think it's healthy. It's not that we're naive, and we're not overly naive. We're not overly confident, and we're mindful of what that means and what it means to us as entrepreneurs. As a founder, I run a venture studio and a fund now, and so this is what we live in. We live in the world of experimenting in building new companies for industries that have big problems, and then we'll start those companies as inventors, and then we will fund other companies that are doing the same thing. And what I'm always looking for is that balance between extreme ambition and like I got to change the world, change the industry, and a pragmatism that makes sure you don't run off a cliff. And a balance of those two things really comes down to the understanding of fear and getting to a place where most of us are too afraid to even try, especially when you may not look like everyone else around you, right? Whether you're an outsider anyway, you're too black, too old, too young, too whatever. We overplay that in our own mind, and the fear impacts our performance, whether it stops us from doing something or whether it makes us make bad decisions. And so that's the one thing I would focus on. And if I could wave a magic wand with all the entrepreneurs I work with and all the team members I work with, that would be the magic wand, that they have a really healthy relationship with their own fear as it relates to how they approach whatever they're doing.
That's excellent. Stacy, bring us home.
Not to sound like a contrarian here, but I wouldn't change a thing because, so many times history has proven that. So there was a very dangerous moment. If Hamet and I got what we wanted, we had done our first deal with MovieTickets.com, which was partly owned by AMC. And if we got what we wanted, that we would have been a lukewarm Fandango 2.0 if we got what we want. But when the industry rejects you because you're too far ahead, they don't understand, you go through a metamorphosis that radically changes Mother Nature. And so when we got forced out, we had to create, we were falling to earth and we had like 90 days worth of capital, and we ended up creating patents because we had to. And I think about when Reed Hastings and those guys approached Blockbuster to try and have Netflix buy them. Google tried to get bought early. There were so many times that companies that changed everything about the way we do things, they were rejected. They were put out to the pasture. They were told when Google didn't want to charge for software, like people were like, what are you talking about? That doesn't make any sense. Are you aware of Microsoft? You charge for everything. You charge all the way up the food chain. You give them the tiniest updates, ship the new software every 12 months, and you charge for it. And you force them into that upgrade. And so I think that there's a calcification that happens in how when people done what they've done for a long time, and there are people who come and they're outsiders, and they just go, well, why aren't they just doing this? Well, because that's the way they've been doing it for 50 years. And it's not until the Wright brothers, and this is what I learned from Hamet, because Hamet brought to my life that because he had, even though we were both techies, he came from a world where, break it fast and break it often and learn quick. And he was all about these quick tests all the time. Well, let's test it this weekend. And we learned how to run in 7-day sprints. We would build Monday through Friday. We would test over the weekend. We would come back on Monday, and we ran in 7-day sprints. The movie industry cannot run in 7-day sprints. It can't think in 7-day sprints. But it can literally go to market and test something in theaters. The reason we're in the West Village is because there's 8 different theater circuits within a 1-mile radius of our office, which allows us to test Regal and AMC and Alamo Drafthouse and iPick, and we can test. And when you test at one of those theaters, you're testing across their whole ecosystem. So we're sitting there testing all the time at very high frequencies. So we're not guessing. It's the data that's telling us what's the truth. And that's where me and I were never guessing when we walked into Jerry Lopez's office and said, we can increase by 60%. And it increased by 112%. And so that's why I say the electric car got introduced, but until everybody said it can't happen, you cannot make a reusable rocket. You cannot do these things. And Elon said, why would you throw a plane in the ocean after you use it once? Doesn't it sound crazy? But NASA's like, because that's what you have to do. You have to dump it in the ocean. And so I wouldn't change it, because the old guard, and Hamet and I will be disrupted by some kids right now in their dorm room or in their bedroom working on stuff, writing code in ways that we can't even think, that will make us look ancient. And so I think it is the way it is. Mother Nature's perfectly designed. And I like how she builds things. And that's what made us who we are, is that firing process that made us hardcore about facing fear and walking through it anyway. I mean, we were two guys and we took on the whole industry. They were pissed, and they would from Mark Cuban sending a cease and desist, and AMC sending a cease and desist, and Hamet and I are on the phone, just the two of us, going, "What the hell did we just do?" We got shut down by an entire. And Amy Miles is doing announcements, and Sherry Redstone is at the summit on stage talking about us, and Hamet and I were like, it's just the two of us, you know. And that's the part that I just crack up. But if there wasn't the so much against us, we wouldn't have become who we were and wouldn't have built what we had to have built. If they had adopted us and said, come on into the tent, there would have been a watered down product that would never have moved the needle at all. That's my 2 cents.
Absolutely outstanding. So it's MoviePass.com. That's where people go. It's same URL as always. Hamet, is there a website? You've got so many enterprises going. I don't know which one to plug.
Yeah, well, my main focus is share ventures. So if you go to share.vc, it's still a little bit stealthy, but you can see what we're up to there. Share.vc.
All right. Share.vc and MoviePass.com. I want to thank my guests, Stacy Spike and Hamet Watt. This has been an amazing, inspiring, outstanding conversation. I want to wish both of you the best of luck going forward. Anyone viewing this podcast who has not yet subscribed to The Hollywood Heretic, please do so by visiting hollywoodheretic.substack.com and consider becoming a paid subscriber for access to members-only content and podcast episodes going forward. Thank you all again.